Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and we're back this Friday with another quite special show. We've got with us for the whole show Shona Robison MSP, the MSP for Dundee City East and the chair of the Social Justice and Fairness Commission. Shona, how are you this evening?
Yeah, I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm not bad at all. We'll just go through these coronavirus figures for the day, and then we'll get right into the conversation with you. So
Okay.
our coronavirus update, as usual. As of 2 p.m. today in Scotland, there have been a total of 82,266 coronavirus tests concluded. Of those, 68,006 were confirmed negative, and 14,111 were positive. 71 patients were in intensive care last night, with 53 of those having tested positive, and there were a total of 1,066 people in hospital with confirmed COVID-19 and a further 383 with suspected cases. That's an increase of 143 confirmed new cases, but again, small drops in the numbers in hospital. And the number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection has sadly risen to 2,053. This number only includes those who have died in hospital having received a positive test for the virus. And the latest UK daily figures available show that 33,998 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have now sadly died from their illness, an increase of 384. And that number for the UK refers to deaths in all settings, not just those in hospitals. So, Shona, I suppose the first question is, how has your lockdown been? Are you coping okay there at home?
Yeah, it's difficult for everyone, isn't it? Yes, just getting into a different routine, working from home. My staff are working from home, so we're working a virtual local office, a lot of inquiries about lots of COVID-related issues, small businesses, people asking questions about their own circumstances. So we have been making it work and getting on with work as much as possible. We started going down to Parliament a couple of days a week recently, so there's been a lot of COVID-related business to be getting on with. I sit on the COVID-19 committee, which is a sort of scrutiny committee, and we're dealing with a lot of legislation at the moment. So it's busy.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, we may get to this kind of thing a wee bit later in the show as well, but do you think there's a space there? We've all a lot of people now have maybe found that they can work from home, where maybe their employer had told them that that wasn't possible before now. Do you think there's maybe space for us to start thinking about different ways of working as we come out of the crisis?
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. We have to look at, I think, working practices more generally. Without a doubt, there is an ability now to work from home that employers might be quite surprised about in terms of the productivity. People are able to work from home and it works. So maybe that's something that will become more of the norm even when we're out of lockdown. And I think that gives it more flexibility to employees. So I think the whole area of working practices is something as a commission we are keen to look at. I also think it takes pressure off of roads. So in terms of environment and climate change, having fewer people in cars going to and from the workplace is again a bonus. And also businesses themselves could perhaps save on office space if they're able to let a number of staff work from home. So I think with the use of technology, we're able to have a more flexible working environment. And I think it showed even that Parliament is having virtual meetings, people being able to ask questions who are isolating at home. We're now even testing out voting from remote locations as well. So it just shows you sometimes we're forced into these situations, but it gets us to look at things that maybe we should have been looking at already.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think especially with the virtual parliament, we've been talking just recently about some of the more kind of far-flung parts of Scotland, how difficult it can be to maintain a family life back in your constituency while working in Edinburgh. And that's even allowing for the fact that Holyrood is one of the most family-friendly parliaments around. There certainly seems like that should be somewhere we could look at making some changes. But moving on to this, sorry, you broke up there for a second. I do apologise. But moving on to the Social Justice Commission, you were at a big splash on the front page of the National today, talking about your work. So for people who haven't heard much about it, can you just tell us first of all what the Social Justice Commission is and what it's set up to do?
So the Social Justice and Fairness Commission was established towards the end of last year. The First Minister wanted to have a commission that could look at some blue skies thinking, I guess, around how do we create a more socially just and fairer Scotland. We obviously had the Growth Commission prior to that, and so she was keen to make sure that we had a focus on social justice. Now, she asked me to chair it, which was a great honour, and we have some great people sitting as commissioners on the commission, and really we want to look at areas of things we could get on with now, but also a route map to some of the things that would require the powers of independence to deliver, and to look at some of the recommendations that we would put to the first, second, third governments in an independent Scotland. So looking at that kind of short, medium, longer term horizon of what are the things that would make a real difference to our nation, and things that we've maybe not been able to do under the powers of devolution. But having said that, there may be things that we recommend that could be got on with now, not least that we're in a very different environment. We're not going to go back to some of the old ways. We have a new normal that will face us coming out of lockdown. So the Commission is keen to be looking at, well, what does that mean in terms of a post-pandemic Scotland? Now, obviously, we were established and we wanted to get on. We were about to go live just before lockdown happened, and we had a number of national assemblies lined up. We were putting together the social media platforms and a website to go live. And of course, like everything else, when lockdown happened, all of that was paused for obvious reasons. But we felt that because everybody is talking the length and breadth of Scotland about what does this mean for us as a society, that the pandemic has made us think about things maybe a bit differently, that now was the time to actually get things back up and running in a virtual sense, get the website going and see what people have to say. So it's a very open consultation. There are 3 working groups that have continued to meet virtually, looking at a secure income, looking at health and well-being and homes and communities. So those working groups have been getting on with it. Now we have a number of members of the Commission, some SNP, but not all SNP. So we have people like Sir Harry Burns, who obviously was the former Chief Medical Officer, who's actually been had quite a lot to say, obviously, during the pandemic. He's been in a few TV virtual interviews, and he's been on radio giving his opinion. And it's really great to have Harry, because looking at health inequalities is a major focus of the Commission, and I can't think of anybody better to have on the Commission than Harry. So we are getting on with the work, and today has been exciting because it's an opportunity to get out there more broadly and to basically say, come and let us know your views. Come onto the website. There's it's very easy to use. Let us know what you think.
Mm-hmm. So, what is that website, by the way, if people want to look up?
So it's socialjustice.scot.
Okay. Right. Well, we will remind people of that at the end of the show as well, but just to make sure we had that out there. Socialjustice.scot. And by the way, if you at home want to join in with the conversation just now, you please do. You can follow us on Twitter at BroadcastScot, and you can join the conversation with the hashtag Scotland@7. That's Scotland AT 7. We'd love to hear from you during the show. But now this has taken quite a while. This was announced back in April at the spring conference last year, and as you say, obviously lockdown has kind of delayed your getting started on it. What's been going on in that intervening year?
Well, we were getting established, so we were recruiting members to the commission. Then we set up the 3 working groups, and we've been meeting before lockdown, obviously, we were meeting as a commission, had a number of meetings, developing a work plan, deciding what areas we're going to focus on, getting the working groups up and running. They've been meeting as well. And we wanted to begin to scope out our work plan and get some work underway before we then went live with the consultation. And so some areas have already emerged as areas of research that are well underway, things like universal basic income. So we have been getting on with work. But without a doubt, the public-facing bit of it has been delayed, but we felt that the appetite is there in Scotland just now to think a bit differently, and we didn't want to delay any further. So here we are today, having that open conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen several organisations, not just in the UK either, talking about this idea of building back better, about the new normal not being like the old normal, given that the coronavirus has kind of shown up so many of the weaknesses in the way society is structured just now. So how are you going to be getting people involved then? Obviously, those national assemblies won't be able to take place in person, as I know they were planned to. So is there a plan in place already for how people are going to be engaged in that kind of deliberation beyond just submitting answers to surveys on a consultation website?
Yeah, well, I should also mention social media platforms. We're on Twitter and Facebook, and hopefully that will attract an audience that use those platforms. But obviously, not everybody does. Well, before lockdown, we were also out meeting organisations. I had a range of meetings with a number of third sector organisations that are very much focused on tackling poverty and inequality. And members of the Commission were likewise out and about meeting organisations in their spheres of influence. So we've already done a bit of that engagement with organisations. But in terms of the public, we are looking, I'm hopeful that we will see potentially a number of virtual national assemblies. I know that there's certainly been a number of virtual branch and constituency meetings. I've been online with a couple. I've got a number of others scheduled in my diary, and I know other commission members are going to be doing likewise. But we don't just want it to be about the SNP. So I was very clear today that we want to talk to people beyond the SNP. Now, we can do that in a variety of ways. We can hold virtual discussions, and we're looking at how we do that. I'm very open to any local organisations or national organisations that want to host kind of discussion forums. We want to be as open as possible. So we'll have a range of ways that people can feed in. I've actually been contacted today by a number of people on social media who have got their own personal experiences that they just wanted to share and find a way of sharing, and that's good. It's about getting people talking, and that is, I think, there's a real appetite for that at the moment. So a variety of ways, and hopefully even more over the next coming weeks.
Great. Now you mentioned universal basic income there. As you say, there's been work going on for a while to develop trials of that in Scotland. So could you tell us a wee bit about that? Again, that was one of the things that was mentioned on that national splash today. Why do you think universal basic income is a good idea?
So it's interesting that something that was perhaps of minority interest before the lockdown and before the pandemic has suddenly become quite mainstream in discussions and thinking. A number of other political parties have nailed their colours to the mast around adopting this as an idea. Obviously, the SNP has been talking about this for quite some time. However, the role of the Commission is going beyond talking about it and actually beginning to scope out what kind of model could apply to Scotland, because there are various models. The other bit of thinking is, that you really probably wouldn't want to just take UBI and sit it on top of existing systems, because some of the existing systems actually, frankly, don't work very well. We don't have a good integrated tax and benefits system. So we would want to see UBI as part of a restructuring. We have a very complicated tax and benefits system that actually is hugely inefficient and very expensive, makes people jump through 101 hoops to get anything at the end of the day, and universal credit is widely discredited. So we want to see universal basic income as part of I would say, a bit of a restructuring generally. Now, that would be quite hard to do under the devolved powers, because we don't have control over the tax and benefit system, or the benefits we do have control over is about 15%, quite limited. So we have to be realistic around that. But we want to come up with proposals that are workable, that are affordable, obviously, but also are a bit of a catalyst to some further changes. We also want to think about how we value some of the unpaid roles that we have. If anything, this pandemic has made us relook at what's important. The role of carers, both paid and unpaid, has really come into the fore. And if you think about the role that unpaid carers have performed, and it's really good that the carers allowance supplement has been increased as an extra payment that's going to be made to unpaid carers in June, and that's all good. But really, when you think about the value of that unpaid care, it is huge. Now, in looking at universal basic income, we want to look at whether or not we can incorporate some additional support for people who are in those caring roles and are without whom we couldn't manage, we couldn't afford for the state to look after all of those loved ones who unpaid carers look after. So we're not just looking at UBI in isolation, we have to look at it as part of some of the wider restructuring that we would want to recommend. So work is ongoing, but we've got a lot to do in that area. We don't want to just pick something off the shelf. We want to look at the best ideas and make sure that what we recommend is workable for a population the size of Scotland, and that's basically what we're getting on with.
And have you mentioned that some of the ideas that come out of the Commission might be things that can be done with current powers at Holyrood, and some that might require the powers of independence. I wonder, with something like UBI, obviously there are incredible challenges where the DWP has control of some benefits, the Scottish social security system has some, and then the tax system doesn't really link to either of them. And then, of course, there's differences in how taxation is done, even just income tax, how income tax is done on different types of income. So there's a whole lot of kind of complicating issues there. But is that something where you might produce one version that says, well, this could be done within the UK context, but this maybe better way of doing it could only be done with independence?
Well, we're not going to rule anything out. And, I know the Scottish Government was keen to do some pilots, and have certainly been scoping out about how could you do some pilots within perhaps local authority areas. And I think they selected what those were going to be, but the officials that gave evidence in the Scottish Parliament laid out just how difficult that is without the cooperation of the tax and benefit system. Now, without being too blunt about it, is a Tory UK government going to really be that helpful in testing out UBI in a Scottish context? I'm not sure that they are. Now, that's going to make that very, very difficult, because without that cooperation, you would really you'd be trying to test a system of UBI, but with only half the tools in your box. So, we have to be realistic about that. So we will scope out what we can, and we'll come up with recommendations that will suit the population of Scotland, but we will also set that within a context of the other changes that we would want to recommend that are made. So if you were starting to reform and recalibrate a tax and benefit system in Scotland, it would look, I suspect, quite different from what we have in the UK. It would be more simplified, it would be easier to navigate, it would be fairer, it would recognise perhaps some of the caring responsibilities I've just been describing. So, we wouldn't, as I started off this conversation saying, it would be unlikely we would recommend just taking a system of UBI and sitting it on top of the existing structures. We would want to look at it in the context of, well, what other changes would we recommend that are made to make it work to its fullest potential. At the heart of all of this is social justice and fairness, and I think what the pandemic has shown is that it doesn't take much to tip people over into poverty. People relying on universal credit and food banks for the first time in their lives because of the pandemic, the fragility of all of that, and the furloughing scheme that the UK government has had to produce, while it is welcome and has help to people, there's no doubt about that, it does show how easily and how fragile our whole system is. And I think UBI, delivered in the right way, could provide a much better safety net and support for people, because this might not be the only and final crisis that we face as a world and as a nation. So we need to think about what this has taught us and look at how we could do things differently. I think there's an appetite for that at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, people who are long-term watchers of Scotland at 7 will know we're big fans of UBI here. So I definitely look forward to seeing what you come up with on that. As far as the other kind of strands of the work go, though, what are the big policies that you're thinking about in terms of health inequalities, for example? What kind of work are you doing, or is there research going on to find out what the problems are, or are you kind of taking existing research and then trying to find solutions to them?
Well, there's work going on distilling some of that research. We have some research capability that has just come available to us in the last few weeks, which we're grateful for. So at the moment, the 3 working groups are kind of distilling what is the best evidence that is around. Now, having Harry Burns on board is handy because he's probably written half of it, and he will tell you very clearly that you need to look at the causes of health inequalities, which goes right back to birth, really. And if you want to interrupt that cycle, you have to really deal with things like adverse childhood events. You have to deal with housing. You have to deal with ingrained poverty that maybe goes back generations. You have to look at addictions. You have to, there's not one magic bullet that will solve health inequalities. You have to look at things in the round. And Harry has looked at a range of interventions, and some of which work. He's very keen to look at things that have an evidence base. So, we are beginning to look at what could work. And there's been some great things done already, I should hasten to add. The Scottish Government's been quite radical in many respects. If you look at things like the Family Nurse Partnership, where there were wraparound supports to families, particularly focused on teenage pregnancy, where it was shown that if you intervened and supported a family in the early years, then the benefits of that are felt when that child or children into their teenage years. So you have less teenage pregnancy, you have better educational outcomes, less addiction, and better prospects as a whole. Now, so there are things that have been tried. Our job is really to look internationally at, well, what else and what else works at really trying to interrupt those health inequalities, and we would distill that into some workable proposals. We might even be saying, actually, some of the things that are being tested we should be doing more of, but there will undoubtedly be things that we will recommend that perhaps haven't been tried in a Scottish context. So having Harry on board, as I've said, throughout this discussion is good, and he's keen to write some papers and get those papers out for further discussion.
Sure. So what kind of countries are you looking at, and are you just kind of looking, or are you actually in discussions with other governments about what advice they can give you?
Not in discussion with other governments, but through our membership and our networks of people who are on the Commission. They all have international networks already. So Harry and others already have those international networks across public health, and those who are the bodies that are creating some of the thinking that have led on public health measures and population health measures across the world. They're well linked into those networks, so we'll be utilising all of that to make sure that we are looking at some of the best evidence available, and that's already being distilled through the working groups. So we're not starting from scratch. A lot of that work is already underway.
And on the other strand, the kind of housing and things like that, what kind of approaches are you looking at there? We've seen policies from Commonweal, for example, proposing ways to regenerate Scotland's social housing stock. And a lot of things there, a lot of housing policy also tied into wider land reform issues. What kind of frame of reference do you have for housing policy there, and what's your thinking there?
So housing doesn't sit in isolation. You're absolutely right. It sits within communities, and it sits within land and looking at and environment as well. So we have Rob Gibson, who obviously used to be a member of the Scottish Parliament, leading work within that working group. Now, Rob is a well-known land reformer. He is very much of the view that we need to look at things like land ownership. We need to look at utilisation of land. We need to look at things like place and community, and how communities are, if you like, democratised, because Rob, and I think, has argued, and again we'll be producing some work around this, that we have structures in Scotland that are democratic structures around Scottish Government. We have local authorities, but actually we're maybe not as good as we could be around community empowerment and community participation, and that's actually where, for a lot of people, they feel decisions should be made. So we're looking at some of that. Also around accessibility and affordability. So if you live in a rural community, which obviously Rob does, he will point out that actually part of it is about the affordability of housing, the availability of housing, public transport, and the affordability and accessibility of that. So how do you get from one community to another, and how do you get to your place of work? So we're looking at all of those issues because they're all interrelated, and trying to make sense of them and come up with what we think are workable recommendations that could benefit not just urban Scotland, but rural Scotland as well. So Rob is doing a great deal of work. He's speaking to a huge amount of people and has really been getting on with the task. So I think some of the ideas that will emanate from that working group will be quite exciting.
Mm-hmm. And are there any sort of hard limits on what you're able to propose? I mean, for example, the land reform question might raise proposals for land value taxation, for example. Would you be able to propose something like that? Or when it comes to, say, public transport, could you recommend particular rail lines get reopened, or are there any sort of limits to what you're able to propose?
Well, I don't. There's no kind of limits that I've been given in any sense in that respect, and I've not. I don't think we should rule anything in or anything out. But I don't want to prejudge either, and I think the folk on the commission are very conscious that whatever we recommend has to be workable. So there's no point in recommending things that are just not doable. So they have to be workable as well as radical change. Changing. But they have to be workable, and everybody's aware of that. We're all long enough in the tooth to know that we need to make sure that things that we recommend are actually have some potential of happening. So, but we are open-minded, and that's the message today with the launch, that we're open-minded. We want to hear people's views, whatever those views are, and there will be, as you can imagine, a range of views from one end of the spectrum to the other. But in Scotland, we tend to land in a place that is progressive, forward-looking. So I would expect that we will land as a commission, in a kind of area that is progressive, things that will be achieving social justice and fairness. We're not going to recommend anything that doesn't improve social justice and fairness. So those are the parameters. What we recommend must make Scotland more socially just and fair. Beyond that, I think we've not been given any particular limits. But our own limits are that we want it needs to be workable as well as ambitious.
Sure. Okay. Now you mentioned some of the obstacles to certain policies given the constitutional setup as we have it. Obviously, you're pro-independence, but we were talking on last Friday's show about VE Day, and Murray Pittock mentioned Tom Johnson, the Secretary of State during the war under Churchill, who was kind of left to his own devices and able to do a lot of quite radical things in Scotland during that time. Why is it, do you think, that Tories now are so much less willing to have Scotland do its own thing than they were maybe in the 40s, 50s, when the Tories were much more popular in Scotland as well?
Well, maybe the fact that they're not popular in Scotland, and maybe they feel under pressure. Maybe they feel that they've lost power and control, and their way of reacting to that is to try to stop that, which actually is a mistaken strategy, because I think the more you try to hold on to power that you feel is slipping away, the more you can make it slip away even further by your actions and responses. Now, I think this pandemic in many ways has shown that we are able to make our own decisions. We're able to cooperate as well, and it's quite right in something like this that there is cooperation where cooperation can happen, and not just across the UK but globally in many respects. But there is a growing sense, and I guess there has been since the advent of devolution, around Scotland's sense of itself. I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and I remember Scotland being a very different place about its own self-confidence and self-awareness. It had a lot of cringe. I think a lot of that has gone. I think we know more around who we are and what we are as a nation. We're more confident in our own shoes, and I think that means that the decisions that we make will grow in confidence around where we go from here. Now, clearly there are people who are yet to be persuaded of independence, and I understand that, and we've got a job to do to persuade people, and our own behaviour and the way we carry ourselves and the way we engage in that debate is important as well. shouting at folk because they don't agree with you is never really going to persuade anyone. And that goes for those in the unionist community as well as it does for those who are already persuaded of the case for independence. So the way we carry ourselves and the way we handle our debates are important, and we need to do that by the power of persuasion, not by shouting and condemning others. So one thing I think is interesting is that a lot of people have talked about the fact that in the post-war era, ushered in a big period of change with probably one of the most radical Labour governments that has ever been seen, and obviously the welfare state and the NHS were ushered in on the back of that. I mean, I see a real potential for the SNP as it is to be that party of radical change, as it has always been in many respects, and to make sure that we're always the party that is leading the debate about what next for Scotland, what are the big ideas. And I think the role of the Commission is really important in that, in being able to step outside of the kind of government space, to have some blue skies thinking and really have that genuine debate. And I am up for that with whoever. We want this to be as inclusive as we possibly can, and hopefully today is a milestone in making that happen.
Sure. Now, on that note, the kind of just the words social justice have kind of a stigma around them for certain people, maybe people who are a bit more socially conservative, and that is a group that the independence campaign has typically found it harder to reach into. So do you worry that there's a tension there if you're saying independence is all about social justice, that people who are that bit more socially conservative, people who maybe don't like the idea of social justice warriors or whatever, that they might be put off the idea of independence by that?
Well, let me say a couple of things about that. I mean, obviously the independence movement has always been a broad church from right across the spectrum. But I guess the SNP, I've been a member now since 1988, that's a few sleeps ago, and what I recognised quite quickly, having come from a kind of left-wing upbringing, and then a bit of a kind of dabbling with Labour politics for a while, what I noticed about the SNP is how it manages to kind of resolve these debates, that you would have a spectrum of views on an issue, but it by and largely landed on a kind of left of centre kind of progressive space. And that's probably because it reflects Scotland. I mean, we have a variety of views in Scotland right across the spectrum, but where Scotland generally lands, and you can see that through voting patterns, has been in a kind of left of centre progressive left space. So I think the SNP just kind of reflects that. Now, that's not to say that there are obviously always going to be other views. There's other views now, and there'll be other views post-independence, and people will be able to vote for parties in an independent Scotland that reflect their own values, their own beliefs. But I would hazard a guess that where Scotland ends up electing its governments in a post-independent Scotland will continue to be in that kind of left of centre space. I might be wrong, but my guess would be that's where we will end up. And that's comfortable for me as someone who's always argued for social justice. And my goodness, when you think about some of the changes that have happened, and I go back again to my formative years as growing up as a young person in Scotland, if someone had told me that within my lifetime we would have equal marriage and some of the real kind of changers of who we are as a society, I don't know if I would have believed them, to be honest. But here we are, and we're in a different space, and all of that is about who we are and how we carry ourselves and how we look at other people. and how we are comfortable with ourselves and others and our society, we've come a long way from how we used to feel about ourselves and others, and to be honest, that's got to be a good thing.
Mm-hmm. And I know we've only got you for another few minutes, so I'm just curious, when it comes to, say, a topic like UBI. The Lib Dems, Willie Rennie came out the other day saying he was pretty much all for it. Labour have been kind of wavering on it a wee bit at a UK level, but several of their members in Scotland have said they support it. Do you think there's potential for some of these issues where there's a desire in Scotland amongst the public and amongst a cross-party selection of politicians, but there's a blockage at the UK level? Do you think there's potential there for some of the Labour and Lib Dem politicians, particularly, to maybe start to come around to the idea of independence?
So it's interesting on UBI how, as we started at the beginning of this conversation, how mainstream it's suddenly become from being something that was really only discussed in the kind of, the kind of left of centre in, SNP circles and maybe sort of radical left organisations. And now we have, as you said, the Liberal Democrats coming aboard, many Labour politicians. So as an idea, I think its time has come, and the more other parties talk about it and the more we discuss it and it becomes that kind of mainstream thinking, of course, the more likely it is to happen. Now, I hope that in a UK level that UK-based politicians discuss it as well, because if it's a good idea for Scotland, it's probably a good idea for other places as well, and for other parts of the UK. So I would like to see it being discussed more broadly, and who knows, it might end up appearing in other kind of manifestos for future elections. Who knows? And I just think it gathers pace and gathers credibility. Now, as I said at the beginning, there are 101 varieties of UBI. So, our job as a commission is really to take the concept and the broad idea, but actually to look at putting some meat on the bones of that. Well, how would it work? What would it look like? What are the best options here for Scotland? But I'm more than happy for the fact that others are looking at it as well. I think that helps our case.
And just finally, before we let you go, there had been plans to move the independence cause forward. The Scottish Government had some plans in motion when lockdown happened. So now, obviously, we're going to have to reframe our kind of timescales. What kind of timescale do you think we are looking at now before the people of Scotland get another say on independence?
Well, look, understandably, the First Minister and the Scottish Government have had to, be absolutely focused on COVID-19, the pandemic, and saving lives. I mean, you wouldn't expect anything else, which is why I think the work of the Commission is so important, because it's an alternative space to be able to do and continue some of that work. I mean, after we come out of lockdown and after we're out of the pandemic, I'm sure Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister, will have more to say on that. And I think there's an appetite to, get some of the, National Assembly space open in a virtual manner to begin to keep that discussion going. But, I've been arguing for independence for decades now, as have many. And although we all get impatient, it's a journey that has twists and turns. It's never a straight road. It never has been. But it's all heading in that direction. And it may be a longer, windier road than some people would like. But for those of us who have been around this cause for longer than I care to remember, there are no easy shortcuts. We need to persuade a majority of the population as to the benefits of independence for our nation. And we have made huge progress there. When I joined SNP in 1988 during the Govan by-election, We were a lot further away from independence than we are now. The job is to persuade those who are not yet persuaded, and I see the role of the Commission as that's part of our job, not the only job, but it's part of our job to paint a picture of what that could look like, so that those who are not yet persuaded may be persuaded yet. And I'm very optimistic about that happening. And when I speak to people across all walks of life in Scotland, there is an appetite there for doing things a bit differently. And so I'm very optimistic, and the role of the Commission will be important in that respect.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for joining us tonight, Shona. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And just to remind people, it's socialjustice.scot for the consultation. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
And do you know the social media, the Twitter handle off the top of your head?
Social Justice and Fairness Commission on Facebook, and at SJF Commission on Twitter.
Okay, well, I'm sure people will be able to find you. That's socialjustice.scot. I'm sure has links to the social media anyway. So
yes,
my
Twitter address, Shona Robison, has links as well.
Okay, brilliant. Well, Shona Robison, the convener of the Social Justice and Fairness Commission, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I hope we can talk to you again sometime soon to get an update on how things are going.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Cheerio now. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
So that was Shona Robison MSP, the convener of the SNP's Social Justice and Fairness Commission. We are just going to move on now, though, to give you a wee roundup of the headlines today before the end of the show. We had to switch things around. We only had Shona from 7 until 1:45, so we decided just to bump the headlines to the end of the show today. So I'll just run through those. And the Scottish Government has announced plans to enable local authorities and health boards to take over the running of private care homes if the health of residents is at risk. The power is set to be part of the Coronavirus Scotland No. 2 bill and expands the ability of the Care Inspectorate and the Scottish Government to step in if a COVID-19 outbreak cannot otherwise be managed. Such a takeover would require authorisation by a sheriff, but the proposal does allow for ministers to take action first while they await a sheriff's decision. The SNP has said the Tories must abandon plans to shut down virtual participation in Westminster, as a new poll reveals the overwhelming majority of the public oppose the move. Polling by YouGov, conducted yesterday, shows 68% of people in Scotland oppose calls for all MPs to return to Parliament physically. Across Britain, 60% of people oppose the move, including a majority in all demographics and voting groups. Another poll has shown a substantial majority of people in Britain want the UK to extend the Brexit transition. The poll by Focal Data and commissioned by Best for Britain suggests that 83% of people in Scotland and 77% across Britain say the UK government should agree to an extension of the Brexit transition period, including 61% of Tory voters and 57% of those who voted Leave in the 2016 referendum. It follows a series of polls consistently showing clear majority support for extending the transition period, including surveys by Panelbase, YouGov and Focal Data. And that news comes as a week of Brexit talks ended with neither side sounding optimistic. EU negotiator Michel Barnier said the talks had been very disappointing and accused the UK of trying to pick and choose which rules it would stick to. While David Frost, the UK's chief negotiator, said there had been very little progress due to what he called the EU's ideological approach. Refugee and international aid groups have warned of a major crisis in some of the world's most crowded refugee camps, as positive cases were identified this week in camps on Lesbos in Greece and at the 1 million person Rohingya camp at Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. Overcrowding, especially at food distribution points, presents a major risk for rapid transmission of the virus. And a lack of adequate food, water and medicines means the overall health of many refugees is already compromised. Tun Keen of the Burmese Rohingya Organisation UK called on the international community to do more to help protect the Rohingya people and urged the Bangladeshi government to allow aid agencies to return to work. Dimitra Kalogeropoulou, the International Rescue Committee country director in Greece, said that the mainland needed to take more refugees to ease pressure in the camps, while also urgently providing capacity to quarantine new arrivals. Wang Kun, the Chinese ambassador to the United Nations in Vienna, had harsh words for the United States today at a meeting with OPEC members, accusing the Trump administration of attacking China to deflect from its own poor handling of the coronavirus pandemic. The ambassador also charged the US with prolonging the crisis and making recovery more difficult, both by reducing funding for the World Health Organization and by continuing a draining trade war with China. President Trump has repeatedly attacked China for not being truthful about the new coronavirus, only amplifying simmering tensions over trade throughout his presidency. He has also attacked the WHO for being too China-centric. The organisation has faced criticism elsewhere for its apparent adherence to Chinese orthodoxy by avoiding any mention of the disputed territory of Taiwan, which has responded well to the pandemic without any Chinese involvement. In the US, at least 100 children in New York State have developed a rare inflammatory illness thought to be related to COVID-19, and at least 3 have died, according to New York State Governor Andrew Cuomo. The condition, which is said to resemble Kawasaki disease, typically involves a high fever, a rash on the back, chest and abdomen, bloodshot eyes, swollen hands, feet, lips and lymph glands. This collection of symptoms has been described recently in young people in at least 6 countries, including the US, UK, France, Spain, Italy and Switzerland. Kawasaki disease itself has no known cause, although a viral link has been suggested in the past. Doctors around the world have been studying the syndrome as it relates to the novel coronavirus, but to little success thus far. A new date for peace talks between warring factions in Afghanistan is under discussion, and the United States has heard positive reports about the formation of an inclusive Afghan government, US Special Representative Zalmay Khalilzad said today. Speaking to reporters on a conference call, Khalilzad said it would be best if talks began while there is still a significant US military presence in Afghanistan, and that he would soon travel to the country to push for a de-escalation in violence and for the release of prisoners. The pace of prisoner releases and disagreements over the Afghan government's composition have both helped delay the talks, which were due to begin on 10th of March under a US Taliban agreement for the withdrawal of US troops made at the end of February. And in Mexico, more than 100 Mexicans are thought to have died from poisoning with adulterated alcohol, as official alcohol sales were restricted during Mexico's coronavirus lockdown. Alcohol sales have been banned in several states and municipalities, while brewing beer was classed as non-essential work, causing the closure of most breweries. At least 51 people died in the central state of Puebla, all thought to be linked to a batch of moonshine tainted with methanol, while 17 died in the village of Chiconcuautla after drinking Rufino, a kind of homebrew made from sugarcane. And that is all the news we've got for you this evening. We'd like to thank you all for joining us. It's only worth creating these shows if you're here to watch them. And with these special Friday shows, we are just starting to build up a wee audience for them now. So do please spread the word about them. We've had some really interesting discussions, I think, on them. We mentioned a wee bit earlier the VE Day discussion we had last week with Murray Pittock and Ellen Hofer. A really, really fascinating discussion for me. This one tonight, I hope, was interesting for you at home as well. If you'd like to help Broadcasting Scotland produce these kind of shows, you can do so by going to broadcastingscotland.scot/register. Sign up there as a supporter, and your £5 a month can make a huge difference to what kind of programmes, the quantity, the quality, and the type of programmes that Broadcasting Scotland can produce. If you're not able to support us financially, I say this all the time, but please don't feel bad about that. We do understand that times are tough, but you can still help us by following us on Twitter at BroadcastScot or by searching Broadcasting Scotland on Facebook. follow us there, and then spread the word about these shows. Let people know why you watch Broadcasting Scotland, what value you think Broadcasting Scotland brings to Scottish broadcasting as a whole. We think we provide we fill an important niche. We're an online-only broadcaster, providing the news from hopefully an angle that you don't see everywhere. Certainly from a uniquely Scottish point of view, that's what we aim to do. We want to grow into a complete, full-service broadcaster for Scotland, though. We can only do that as we build an audience, though. So do please let people know about where we are and what we do. And finally, if you're interested in getting involved here at Broadcasting Scotland, there is always work to be done. There's work to be done on the website. There's work to be done backstage, preparing the show, preparing scripts, writing stories, finding stories, doing interviews, creating graphics, editing videos. There's all kinds of things to be done behind the scenes. And then there's also appearing in front of the camera as well. Gordon and I thoroughly enjoy this work, but occasionally we do need some time off. And it would be great to have a wee backup list at the very least of people who want to get involved, want to be on screen, get a wee bit of experience doing this kind of work. There is always opportunities for that to happen. So if there's anything you'd like to do in the television industry, please do get in touch with us. We can provide training, we can provide space for you to work, and we're very keen for Broadcasting Scotland to be a place where the broadcasters of the future can maybe start to get their feet wet. So if you know anybody who's interested in getting involved in broadcasting, then do please get in touch with us. But that is all we've got time for tonight. I'll be back on Sunday with the full Scottish. Still not 100% sure who we've got as guests for Sunday yet, but I'm sure that, as ever, they will be excellent. Until then, though, that's all we've got time for. So have a great evening tonight, a great day tomorrow. I'll talk to you on Sunday, and have a great day. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.